In this week's episode, the boys cover the ABSA document AB-506, inspection and servicing requirements for in-service pressure equipment. Scott, I feel like this is it's going to be a big episode, and not in the sense of like anything revolutionary, but there's a lot to cover here, and hopefully it'll provide our listeners some value, because this is one of the driving documents for pressure equipment integrity inspection and in Alberta. So
yeah, this is going to be a big one. Just looking at our whiteboard, we almost needed two, and I don't even think we got half written down what we wanted. So yeah, we'll see how this goes. Could end up being a series whether we like it or not. But it's a good one. I think everyone can relate to this one. Whether you're maybe not as much if you're a turnaround guy per se, you're definitely gonna be familiar with it. But definitely for those in-house people working at sites year round, that type of thing, you're going to be quite familiar with this sort of thing.
That and, people just performing, external inspections that are a part of a integrity assessment organization that help owners manage their integrity management programs. So
or those owners that don't have their program and have the contract the companies in to do it for them. They're going to have a good grip on this one. We'll get into all this and explain what all that means. We probably don't even know ourselves, but we're going to give it a shot here. So, couple examples, right? So we'll see where that gets to.
Hopefully it won't be too dry. We'll try and liven it up for everybody here. So, Scott, I guess we'll start. We kind of sat down and went through this. We took our own notes and we kind of combined them. And I think we're going to go through it kind of section by section, or at least cover the sections that require at least a decent amount of conversation. Like some of them we might skip over, but what we think needs to be talked about, we'll talk about it and go from there. And I think the first kind of part is the introduction, but I kind of just picked out one sentence from that whole introduction, which is a couple pages long, kind of just showing what the document's about. But distilled down, AB-506 is intended to provide a consistent approach for establishing inspection and servicing requirements that are effective and practical for all sectors. And all sectors meaning, refining, upstream, petrochemical, and kind of anybody who owns or operates pressure equipment, or I guess who's responsible for pressure equipment, right? Yeah,
exactly. That's a good way to put it. It's almost like you read it right out of the book.
I did. Yeah.
Oh, okay. That's why it sounded so familiar. It's exactly that. It's your maximum thorough inspection intervals, and your pressure relief valve intervals as well too. Those get grouped in there, and we'll kind of explain how they're the same and how they're separated as well in this document. I think another good point while we're on kind of the intro is this document was developed and published, if you will, by ABSA, but don't forget it was also developed with owner users and stakeholders in the industry. So all the owners and owner users and operators of pressure equipment all had their voice in making this too. So this is, and it's like any of the AB documents, this is kind of what industry wanted, maybe not initially, but as they revise it and change things, this is just kind of, they put out one thing and then they start getting feedback from industry, and this is what it morphs into. So this isn't just ABSA necessarily telling everyone what to do. It is, but it's also with some input from those stakeholders as well too.
Yeah, that's a good thing to add for sure.
Yeah, I always think that's an interesting point to drive home with these AB documents. Is it's our jurisdiction telling us what we have to do, but it's also a lot of opinion got put in there too, and a lot of voice from the stakeholders too.
Yep. Scott, what do you think we should touch on first? One thing that we were kind of laughing about before was that in the document, it does recognize that the American Petroleum Institute, API codes, and the National Board boiler and pressure vessel inspection publications, they were recognized and accepted as good engineering practices, but they're not adopted directly from ABSA as enforced documents, right? So
Yeah, I love that line. I like when they have that in there. So if we take the information from these documents and put it in our own publication, it's law. But don't you dare take that same information from their document.
Yeah. Yeah.
But that's essentially where they didn't just take that information and reprint it, but that's kind of where the baseline of this stuff is, right? A lot of these intervals and stuff come from API, National Board, and ABSA. And ABSA and from the stakeholder input kind of put their tweaks on it as well. More so with the owner user and RBI front. When we get to that, that's where it really takes off and kind of it has its own spin.
Yeah. So I guess we kind of at the start here, we kind of thought that going through some of the definitions, at least highlight some of the definitions that we feel that are important, that most people in the industry will already know, but some that we should reiterate. So
yeah, that's what I would say. Ones that are really pertinent to know in the industry and just for this document too. You'll see what we mean as we go through them, but yeah, there's a few things here you should probably understand what they mean just to better understand how this document is laid out.
All right, where should we start, Scott? Which definition do you want to start with here?
Well, I don't know. Do you want to knock off a bunch of these acronyms, make sure everybody's on the same page for what they actually mean?
Sure. You want to go? Okay, yeah. Pick one and we'll start going with that.
Well, A number, is that even in the definitions? Alberta registration number, something like that,
no,
maybe?
I don't think it is, no.
It might not be, but maybe let's throw
start
that
with
one
that,
in there because that's a unique thing to Alberta in this document that if you're listening in Saskatchewan or somewhere else, it's not going to be something that's really applicable at all to you. So,
well, they have S numbers, don't they? Now,
yeah, they got different different registrations too, and but this is an Alberta jurisdiction thing, so we should probably throw that in there. It's essentially, just the registration number for the piece of pressure equipment. So when ABSA does their initial inspection and gives you a permit, they'll put an A number on there. Quite often, they'll stamp it on the actual manufacturer data report if you happen to have that. It'll also be on the inspection permit they give you, and then used to be hand stamped on the nameplate or somewhere where you can't find it. They like to put them in interesting spots,
or where it's painted over.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah. Manway flange on a saddle or something. Various places, but now they're going to stickers, which is interesting. We'll see how those hold up, I guess, over the years. But any of the ones I've seen seem to be fine. They're not peeling off or anything yet. So
I'm sure they've done their research, and in the -40 and freeze thaw kind of cycles we have, they'll stay on.
I'm sure they will. But anyways, yeah, that's the A number. So it's just a letter A followed by, 6 digits, something like that. Kind of like a serial number, right? Just a way to register your pressure equipment. And that's just anything that falls under the Safety Code Act, anything you pay fees on, that type of thing. So it's not necessarily everything. I don't know that we need to get too much farther into that for this episode anyways.
Certificate of Authorization Permit, or CAP, is something that we've talked about before, and it's something that owner users get or integrity management organizations get, which authorize them to perform inspections, and it kind of outlines what they can and can't do. I think, how's that differ from an AQP though? Authorization permit.
Like a Alberta quality program. So
yeah.
I guess the big difference with that, I like how we're getting off topic already.
It's right on topic.
It's on topic, just sideways, I guess. So the difference with that, an AQP would be like your repair construction contractor could hold one of those, and that would be like their quality manual and their program and what they're all allowed to do and what they're allowed to construct, and they would get a cap for that as well. Authorization permit, same idea. And we've talked about that quite a bit. I know in the piping series we talked about that quite extensively, and probably in other episodes too. But that would be one example. And then more specifically to this AB-506 and the integrity inspection side of things, you also can get an authorization permit as an owner user. So you can have your own integrity program, or as a just like an inspection company. So if you're gonna hire out, a lot of the big NDE companies have these as well, or there's smaller inspection companies, a whole mix of them. You can, if you don't have your own program, you can contract these people and they can come do inspections for you. Now, it is important to make sure they do have a cap, that they're authorized to do that, because otherwise those inspections are useless to your equipment. Now, having said that it's all like registered equipment you're paying fees on and has A numbers and those type of things. Unregistered stuff's a little different story there, but just something to be aware of, specifically if you're a mid to small size facility and you are looking to contract somebody in, got to make sure they have a cap, and it's very easy to find out. You can look them up on ABSA's website on their directory.
Yeah.
Tell you what they have and what they can do. It's just like the construction one, very similar.
And inspection companies that actually do have a cap, they can act as a chief inspector for that company if they don't have their own.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So that's pretty good. Certificate of authorization permit, or we've been saying SIP for short. This is kind of
inspection.
What did I say?
Authorization.
Oh, geez.
We already covered that.
Certificate of inspection permit. So this is something that the regulator issues once a piece of pressure equipment is constructed, and it comes along with your piece of equipment. It outlines operating conditions and also any other notes that the regulator wants to see. Usually a blanket statement on there is to ensure that it's got the proper overpressure protection. Have you seen anything else on there?
Yeah, and I think they'll usually throw on their owners responsible to develop some sort of IMS program, something along those lines. Those are usually the ones and the reason the overpressure is quite often, not always, but most of the time, this will be done in the shop. If it's being fabricated here, that's kind of when they do their final inspection and issue the permit.
Yeah.
So it's not necessarily like an installation inspection, which we'll get to a bit later. Or if it's built out of country, out of province, then they may do their inspection on site kind of when it's received. But again, it might not be when it's installed either. It'd be just when it hits a laydown or something like that too.
Yeah, once it's done fabrication. And actually you'll normally see that on the manufacturer's drawings, overpressure protection to be completed or supplied by others or owner.
Yeah, right? Nobody wants to take ownership of that one. Okay, told you it would blow up.
Next one I think we'll cover is...
really quick with the SIP again there. I think I mentioned with the A number, but that your A number will be on there as well too. So that's just kind of like tying all these things together. And I think this is going to be a nice little flow here. Once we get to these definitions and get into the installation and the equipment file, we'll kind of bring a bunch of these things back and then explain how they all kind of, where they live and how they all meet up and how it goes round and round.
Yeah.
Anyways, getting ahead of myself.
No, and actually that brings up a good point. Like, say you do have a piece of equipment and you're having trouble finding the A number, but within the documents of that piece of equipment, you find that certificate of inspection permit. Yeah. You can grab the A number off that for your inspection report, but you should do your due diligence and ensure that the number on the certificate of inspection permit does match what is in the field. Like, look everywhere, because it's usually somewhere, like Scott was saying, like on the saddle or on a manway flange or something. But just another quick location you can grab that A number. Yeah,
and if it is somewhere weird, note that in your inspection report. That's always nice.
Yes.
And somebody puts a note on there like A number stamped on third manway flange or some odd thing. Oh, okay, cool. At least it gives you somewhere to start in the needle of the haystack. I want to say like 75% of the time it's on the nameplate, but that's still a lot of percent of the time it's not. So just some unusual thing to look out for.
Yeah, it is. Okay. Where do you want to go? Inspection Integrity Assessment Organization. I think this is a new one for I think they did some general revisions this year. That's kind of why we decided to kind of cover it. But is that...
Yeah, like I think we're familiar with what this is. I'm not too familiar with the acronym though. I keep having to, what is that again?
Yeah.
But that's essentially what we talked about with the inspection companies and how they can do the contract chief and they can do the integrity inspections for you, and they would have to have their cap. So that's these guys. Integrity Assessment Organization, I guess, is how they like to sum it up now. But that's just your inspection company, right? That can be your big NDE company that has this. That can be your smaller company that has, that just does that and does does visual stuff for you, or they can even run your ESR and be your chief for you. Threw another acronym in there that we're not defining until later, so you'll have to wait and see what that means.
Yeah, but the actual definition within the document does state that they do have authorization permit, a cap, and what's also funny is in brackets there's this often referred to as an inspection company.
Oh, so we're right on the ball there.
Yeah,
inspection company.
Yeah.
I think the big, before we jump on from that one, again, just the big thing is the cap. If you're utilizing somebody like this, if you have your own order user program, that's fine. You wouldn't actually need them. You could just sub in whoever to do the work for you under your own program. But if you are utilizing these people, just make sure these companies, just make sure they do have a cap and they're authorized to do this for you. Otherwise, you could find out down the road that once you get audited or something, none of these inspections are valid.
Yep.
Not something you want to find out the hard way.
Okay, IMS, Integrity Management System. This is pretty straightforward, right?
It should be, yeah. Anybody, maybe not on the QC NDE side, maybe not as familiar with this, but anyone on the straight up inspection side of things should be quite familiar with some sort of integrity management system that the site you're on has, right?
Yeah, and a key note here within the definition is make sure it's in accordance, the inspection. It's an inspection system for, ensuring that the equipment is designed, constructed, installed, operated, maintained, and decommissioned in accordance with the pressure equipment safety regulation. I think.
Nice. I wrote down life cycle.
Well, yeah, that's probably short. Yeah, could have saved everyone 3 minutes of life with my. Yeah.
But yeah, that's a great point. It is supposed to manage the integrity for the entire life. The to some degree the fabrication, then definitely the installation, the maintenance, the intervals, the any kind of work you do to it, that type of thing, and then the decommissioning or the sale or whatever ends up happening to this thing.
Okay, integrity operating window, or IOW. So this is something that it's a big part of risk-based inspection programs, which is one of our next definitions. But it's limits within your process that, if exceeded, may affect the integrity of your equipment and or piping. So it's excursions from your normal process, which like we've talked about before. You get excessive dew point and stuff like that, where you could have dew point corrosion happening, or even pH levels, the acidity of your process, which could affect the integrity of the pressure equipment or the material. So that's what an integrity operating window is.
Yeah, it's kind of like your little buffer where that equipment likes to hum along just quite nicely. And usually a lot of your intervals and especially with your RBI and stuff, it's kind of based on the fact that you're staying in those windows. So, and it can be like your pressure and temperature, right? That's typically what it is, right? So sometimes you might get a little spike over your max pressure or temperature, whatever your window is set at, and then you may have to look into that, reassess it. It may not be a big deal. If it's over a long period of time, then you may be expecting some new mechanism, something like that. But yeah, that's basically just your buffer where that equipment likes to idle along nicely with minimal trouble.
Yeah. Okay, our next one we have here is RBIP. Now,
RBIP.
Yeah, this one, I don't know why they put the P on there, but I guess it's a program. So it's risk-based inspection program. So it's essentially, again with essentiallys.
I love
it. It's a program to determine like a risk profile of either specific equipment or a system, and how to conduct inspections, how best to conduct inspections, I guess, most effectively to determine whether or not you have anything which may affect the design and or operating characteristics of it. Maybe not operating characteristics, but pressure envelope, I guess.
I thought it was just a way to push the intervals out like way beyond what you're supposed to. Isn't that all it is?
Yeah, that's actually exactly what it is. I'm just trying to make it sound fancy. Yeah.
I think the point I want to make with this one with the P on the end is, think of it like the cap that we keep hammering home, that you have to have this cap to do anything. Now, same thing with RBI. If you're going to implement that, don't get too excited when you go back to the tables and it tells you that RBI lets you go beyond these intervals and you can do whatever you want, this and that. Just remember that you have to have a cap. You have to be an owner user. You have to have a cap, and you have to have RBI listed on your cap to be able to utilize RBI. You can't just start winging that around and think you're saving yourself tons of money by doing turnarounds every 10 years. That's not how that works.
Are you saying that the regulator has to approve how you assess risk?
They like to think so, yes.
I'd say that's not too bad because people can get pretty liberal, especially pushing out intervals, especially some of the intervals we've seen.
Yeah, no doubt. That's the point I want to make with that one is that it's not its own cap, but that's going to be like your line item. There'll be a line item thrown on there. So we talked about that in previous episodes that, going back to like the repair construction organizations, they'll have on their cap like 31.3, Section 8, Section 1, whatever, this and that. Similar thing with the owner user cap. They'll have a one-liner, and it's usually not like a column. It's a one-liner at the bottom. It's kind of strange how they do it, but they'll have RBI program, something like that, and that's it. Your RBI program's approved for use until you mess around too much and they take it away.
Well, yeah, they review it though. They kind of check the robustness of it, I guess. At least know that you can do it and have the capabilities to properly do it. As per their, probably API 580 or was it? I think we were talking like PCC 3, which was RBI kind of related. I think that got amalgamated with a different document, but I can't remember.
Yeah, what is it now? The API ones you referenced, but then there's ABSA has a document too, the 505. So that one, I believe it's more or less like a guideline of how to set up an RBI program, but it's such a extensive thing that has so many different rabbit holes. It's really hard to give a template how to do it because everyone's going to have their own different programs. A lot of the bigger places will have like their own kind of in-house designed thing. So it's a really hard thing to put your thumb on, but there is some key points that they have to have. The organization's a big thing. You have to have the personnel and the structure to handle it. It's not, it's not just me and Frank going out there saying you can do turnarounds every 10 years and you're good to go. I mean, we can do that for you if you want, but might get into trouble.
Give us a call. Actually, something that you said there though, like I think some of the larger like players, like maybe some of the international companies, it is more worth it for larger companies to have an RBI program because just the way they're set up and the personnel that they have, like Scott said, like they do have the people and have the ability to put the systems in place. But something else is like they can pull information from all their facilities all over the world to kind of inject information into that program instead of just like the one facility, unless it has, decades of operating history and experience from it properly made, which have been documented well enough to kind of, pull all that information in and kind of give a risk profile for either certain circuits or certain pieces of equipment that they can properly implement RBI.
Yeah, it really is the big organization is the hardest thing for this. Now, if you're one of those small to mid-sized facilities that's bringing in contract inspectors to do your assessments and that every year, a couple months or whatever, RBI is not really a thing for you because you just don't have the personnel to maintain it. And the added cost to bring that in, you're going to find it's not going to be worth it. So it doesn't work for everybody, but it is a nice little thing to talk. It's great to talk about for this document, and it's a thing that works quite nicely with the bigger facilities that do have that organization structure to handle this.
Yeah, and I'd be leery of people trying to sell smaller organizations those types of programs because...
Yeah, it's not something that an inspection company can run for you over emails or something. It's not that easy. It might look like it if you rip through 580 and 581 and, we can apply this. You can't. It's it requires a lot of effort continually and a big team to maintain it.
Yeah. That's pretty good. That was our first little...
Jeez, beat the hell out of that one.
That's an important one though, right?
Yeah, it is. I want to revisit this again whenever we get to the end of this segment here.
This is going quite a bit longer than I thought, talking about all these definitions. But I think
that's about a wrap already, is it? So we got the definitions done.
So that's 506 for you. MDRs, manufacturer data reports.
Yeah.
So this is something that you're going to get with your newly fabricated pressure equipment. Geez, you know what? It might be something you get if you buy used pressure equipment, or at least I hope you would get with used pressure equipment.
Yeah, you would hope you get that. I think when we get to the installation and the equipment file again, I briefly talked about, we'll revisit this again too, but that's something you want to have when it's new. If you don't have it when it's new, you got some phone calls to make or something. But yeah, definitely you'll have that when it's new, and ideally it's going to stay with the equipment for its life, or even when you sell it, you can hand off a nice equipment file with all the history and the MDR to somebody. It's always interesting working on the old equipment from like the 70s and the 80s, and you got the U1 form in there and you can't read anything on it because it's so old. It's been photocopied 350 times, but it's there. It's there.
Thank God for Zoom on the PDF thing, right?
Oh,
and adjusting the contrast to kind of like figure it out. You have like it in negative, like trying to like read what the heck is on there.
Yeah. Man. Oh, no, it's good. But no, that's an important one to keep your hands on when it's new, and then keep it with the equipment. It's typically going to be those ASME forms, U1s, U1As, those type of things. Unless it's built in Alberta, then it's AB-25 is the one they use for that. It's kind of like the CSA knockoff version. So those are kind of the forms you'll see with that.
Actually, you should be able to reorder them from ABSA though, shouldn't you? Like, do you think they would have that on file with their SIPs there?
I think they do. I don't know if that's a 100% thing or not, but yeah, if it's a design that gets registered with them, they should have it. It's definitely something you can look into. If you got the A number or the serial number, they can help you out with that.
Checking saddles just to get a yeah.
Well, I'm told by them if you can't find the A number, they can usually find it with the serial number and whatever else you have, because there's only going to be so many. I mean, there'll be a couple repeating serial numbers, but they're not going to be too many, right? Every manufacturer has their own system, and they're all building
usually
on each other. I don't think they use the same numbers.
No, there'll be some like weird equipment, like compressor bottles or something like that have usually the same serial number, but then it'll be like -1, -2,
assembly line.
Yeah. So just another good little tangent there. Geez. Okay. MOC, management of change.
Yeah. MOC.
So it's another system to manage changes, either with equipment or process that are either temporary and or not what's the opposite of temporary?
Permanent?
Permanent, yeah. I'm trying to pour booze and talk to Scott at the same time. It doesn't always work out. Yeah, either temporary or permanent changes within your system, and that could be something as like either operational changes like limits and or material changes where say, you're finding that you need a different type of material within a certain section of the system. You'd implement management of change in that way. That lets everybody who has stake in that should know, and it gives them the opportunity to review the change and either approve it and or share their 2 cents on why they think it should happen or shouldn't happen, right?
Yeah,
basically.
That's a great way to put it. These things are pretty digital nowadays, so they get pinged around with emails or programs or whatever you have. But yeah, they used to be hand bomb things where you'd have to just send them back and forth and have 10 different people physically signing it or adding their comments and that. But they're pretty slick programs now. But that's exactly what it is. It's just a way to kind of, at the very least, inform all the different stakeholders that may have an interest in that equipment or piping or whatever it is you're doing, meddling with. And then it also gets the input from everybody too, right? Ops is going to be worried about something that, integrity isn't, and vice versa.
Yeah.
So yeah, it just gets everybody's chance to kind of voice their opinion there, whether they like it, and then that's where things get caught too, right? We're missing this, we're missing that.
Oh, good. Okay, this is gonna be a good one, I guess. In-service inspector, or ISI. So, this is your qualification, or it's your in-service inspector, or someone who is deemed competent by our regulator to perform in-service inspections, or has the required competency and is authorized by their employer to perform integrity assessments of pressure equipment under their employer's quality management system and certificate of authorization permit.
Now, under all that fluff there, it is an actual certificate too. It's not one of those cheapo deemed competent things. You do actually get a certificate with this that you carry around. So it's a real thing. So usually how it works is you get some experience as an inspector, and then you apply to ABSA if you got enough experience in education and whatnot. Write a little exam with them, and then like you said, Frank, it's a kind of a 2-part program. You can hold that certificate and walk around with it, but it isn't any good unless you have a cap to work under. So if you're working for one of the big organizations that have their own owner-user program cap, you can work for them. You can certify things as an in-service inspector. If you're working for somebody that doesn't, you're still an ISI, you're still qualified, but you can't use that power anymore. It's got to have the cap to go with it. It's a bit of a 2-part certification, I guess, if you will.
Well, I think you're kind of the experience you were alluding to is like a 510 ticket. And,
sure, yeah.
You do need your API 510 ticket to apply for your ISI or IPV or IPVBV. Like everybody calls it something different, but it's by definition, it's ISI.
I think that's an acronym they're trying to push now. But yeah, IPV is probably what some people are more familiar with, possibly.
Yeah, well, that's what it's what it says on your ticket that you get, right?
Yeah, it still says that. But
or at least I guess it's old enough. I don't know if it's changed. I don't know. But and just like your API tickets, there's recertification periods, and the only difference I think is that with the ISI certification is I think you need to prove continuing education. I think it's 40 hours for I think it's 5 years, right?
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah.
Or if not, I think they just make you write the test again.
Yeah, or they just make you go to IPEA and they give you all your hours at once, right?
Yeah, maybe.
They do. If you go to IPEA, I think you get your full 40 hours, right? If you attend the full 3 days.
Yeah, whatever the certificate they give you for that, they acknowledge that one, but they put their own seminars on too. I think they like those ones too. Probably weight them a little heavier.
Cash cows for sure. They're pretty good though, actually. I do enjoy the ABSA seminars.
I do too, actually. I like all of them. Any of the ones I went to.
I go there for the lunches. And
that too, yeah. Sandwiches. With the ISI thing, I think it's a good point. With the cap has to be kind of they work together type of thing, which kind of leads into like the public occupancy stuff. You wouldn't be able to do that for a number of reasons, but one of them, who holds the cap that allows you to do that inspection? You might if you have your own inspection company, but it's not going to have public stuff listed on there. And the guy that owns the laundromat sure doesn't have one either.
No, and actually you do need your ISI certification to certify repairs and or inspections. Like you can't just walk around with a 510 ticket and do even externals and stuff like that. Like you'll need an ISI to sign off your report for it to,
for a thorough,
be accepted.
Right. Yeah. I think we'll get into that as we move along here. But yeah, that is a good point. There is a number of things you need that ISI certificate to be able to certify. Repairs was a good one, like you mentioned, Frank. Your inspection plan will be another thing. Thorough inspections will be another thing. How about NDE? Like you have, you're going in to do your thorough visual inspection, internal, whatever. You got a guy going in there doing wet fluorescent mag all over the place. He should probably have an ISI too, no?
Undoubtedly. No, of course not. He needs his CJSB.
I don't know about of course not, but
how many, like, I don't, look, NDE techs do a great job at what they do, and like they have a lot of skill, but it's far and few between to actually, have an NDE tech who has their ISI, because normally they'll be on the visual side of things.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, it's two different kind of tasks, if you will, that kind of cross over a little bit. But yeah, they do work in there and, similar integrity inspection type of work, but no, they don't. If they're doing an internal mag or something like that, which is part of the thorough assessment, they don't have to have an ISI as well.
No, they just need their NDE tickets and to be certified to the appropriate,
Right.
things.
Unless you're the owner, then you don't have to have anything. You can
Well,
just do whatever you
unless
want.
you're Scott, then you have all your NDE tickets and your ISI, right?
A lot of renewals.
Yeah. Okay, these are the last two, but we think they're actually the most important. So you've droned on with us for, holy crap, almost 40 minutes already just on freaking definitions. I sincerely apologize for that, but the owner. So I'm going to read the actual definition out of 506 for the owner, because this one is pretty important. This includes a leasee, a person in charge, or a person who has care and control, a person who holds out that the person has the powers of authority of ownership, who for the time being exercise the powers of authority of ownership. What the hell does that mean, Scott?
So basically the owner.
So the owner, okay. So the owner of any pressure equipment, okay. And then we have owner user.
Yeah, so let's just, before we blow by that one quickly, it is as simple as it sounds. Like whatever the facility is, I don't want to name names of places, but like you all know them. So like the said facility you go to, that is the owner. Like all that equipment there is theirs. They own it. They operate it. They're the owner. This next definition is similar, but a very different meaning.
Owner user. An owner that has provided an integrity management system in accordance with the pressure equipment safety regulation and has been issued a quality management system certificate of authorization permit under the PESR section 11.
Oh, Peaser.
Oh man, it's all the dust coming off of that. It's so dry.
You threw another acronym in there that we didn't define.
God, yeah. So basically, an owner who has a cap becomes an owner user who can then own and use their own integrity management program.
It's a great way to put it. They own it and they can use it. The biggest point with this, if you're an owner, that doesn't make you an owner user. Don't interchange these words necessarily, especially let's go pick on the small guys again. They own all the equipment, they operate it. That doesn't mean they're an owner user. You have to have that cap to become an owner user. So it's kind of the same thing, but it is two very different things. You can be an owner or you can be an owner user. You're not entitled to be an owner user just because you own the equipment. You do have to go through that process of getting the manual and getting the cap and all those good things.
Yeah, and we actually went over this because these two different verbiages come up throughout this document on certain sections, and we'll try and point them out, and it depends on what you can and cannot do, specifically when we get to the grading systems on your integrity management program. So it does have some relevance.
Yeah, when you get to that table 1, there's some big differences there on how far you can go with things if you're an owner user and if you're not. And a lot of times, like Frank mentioned, as you're going through this document, they'll just make reference to owner user without spelling it out every time. So whenever you see owner user, you just got to think, okay, you got to have a cap. If anytime they're referencing that word, don't just assume it means an owner and it's like a secret out they gave you or something. It's not. They defined owner user at the beginning. You're supposed to know what the definition means. Right?
Yep. And actually, was that under owner responsibilities? I guess we'll jump to section 5. So people who, or I guess not people, but companies, and because corporations are deemed as people, who own pressure equipment are required to have an integrity assessment program. They're all right. And that's kind of different between public occupancy here. And I think we'll just get this distinction out of the way. So public occupancy is like apartment buildings. Another good one that actually I've had a little bit of experience in is like hockey arenas and stuff like that.
Yeah, I was going to say that too. Hockey arenas are a good one. There's a lot of pressure equipment there. You may or may not realize, in public around those all the time.
Yeah. While they do own it, they're considered public, which then turns into the government domain, which then kind of falls back under the ABSA kind of blanket for the SCO. So your safety codes officer, they would do all the inspections that equipment. I don't know quite how thoroughly they do inspections on that, but ABSA is required to do the inspections on all publicly owned buildings and or boilers and stuff like that. Hospitals is another good.
Hospitals. I don't know if apartments is what you said before.
Yep.
Schools, a lot of those things like that, right? Those older buildings, they got to be heated somehow.
Yeah,
and I think the reason they do it is because they don't really have a choice. Those owners per se, they're not too interested in having an integrity program and operating it and hiring inspectors and stuff like that. So they just don't. So that's why I think that's a big part of why ABSA takes that on. And I believe it's free to them to have them come in and do their inspections. That's just part of their other fees, how that gets paid for. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, most of that stuff they keep on like 1 year intervals. And I think they'll even do like full hydros and things like that on what's a good example? Like the dry cleaners and stuff like that. They'll make them do full hydro tests and that on like kind of a yearly thing. And then they'll issue like a new inspection permit. And then they'll come back next year and do it again because there's never an integrity management system that gets developed. So it's just stays. This will make more sense when we get to the grading system and explain that. But it just forever stays on a grade 1 because there's nobody to manage an integrity program.
What do you think about companies that service these type of things? Like, you know what I mean? Because even like I went to a couple of hockey arenas and like did some like
not in Fernie, was it?
No, fuck off. That's a bad thing to joke about. But like even it was mostly because most of the piping and stuff for a hockey arena is refrigeration. Right. So they have commercial companies coming in. I wonder if they would have to have like an AQP or a cap or something like that to do all those repairs.
Well, I don't think so. Cause it's an interesting one, but like, who's going to police that? I don't know. Right?
ABSA.
Yeah. Well,
okay. This is sidetrack.
It brings up an interesting point though, with like, things like small little package boilers and that. I know that's a tough one for them that I've shared stories with some of the AIs about, and that's one that sometimes can get away from them is people will manufacture these little package boilers and sell them, and they're not even registered with them or anything like that, so they're forever hunting these things down. And it's just because there's not really a thumb on them. They don't have like an inspection program. They don't really care. They don't know, right? So it's just a hard thing to police everything, right? So
it's definitely like outside the realm of their, I want to say their knowledge base of like what's actually happening. Like just like in your house, like you have all this little piping and tubing, supplying water and stuff to everywhere. Like someone going to work at a hockey arena, unless they actually know what the risks are of all the ammonia that they have running through there to keep it ice.
Yeah.
You end up with stuff that happens like in Fernie and stuff like that.
Well,
right?
You don't know until that happens, right?
Right. And then they actually I think AB-615 or something like that is about refrigeration systems or ammonia systems.
Yeah, it could be. I'm not familiar with that one. I know they did.
That's a good little document, actually.
Did you catch the 1 year at IPA when the BCSA or TSBC or whatever the hell they call themselves, the BC ABSA, when they did the little thing on Fernie and what happened there, and they had like an animation and went through it all? It was pretty good.
I think I did. Yeah. It had to do with like I think it was like a tank or something, right?
Yeah, it was like a heat exchanger they had, and it was like the brine water on one side and the ammonia on the other, and it was, I can't remember what was leaking into what, but yeah. Well, it's pretty good anyways. They did a good job of explaining that and good investigation.
Yeah.
Really getting off topic here. But
we've got to give them something interesting to listen to. Jeez. So, okay. What else can we talk about owners' responsibilities here? You do have to have it says an effective integrity assessment or inspection program. And if you don't have these capabilities, that's where your inspection organizations come in and they can fulfill that role for you.
Yeah, and maybe we can talk about that a little bit. Like I can share a couple experiences. One with working at the big facilities that have, like divisions and things like that, or like their own programs they've developed, whatever it is. They've got a pretty elaborate system, and you just get plugged in there and you're just another data entry guy essentially. So they've got a pretty good system in place. I've also had opportunity to develop these programs for some of the smaller kind of gas plants and that they don't really have anything. And we did them as simple as just running an Excel sheet with all the equipment and having the intervals on there, very similar to how the ESR is laid out, and we'll explain what that is eventually. And that worked just fine because it's a small facility, and then you can kind of break up your intervals, let them know what's coming up. We'd even specify some NDE that we wanted, and you can just tweak that as you get some more inspection history with the equipment. So you can do these things very simple. If it's a very small facility, and that would be like a third-party inspection company kind of handling that for them. Or you can have a really super elaborate system like some of the big players have. That one's better than the other. Well, the nice elaborate system is definitely a lot better, but they're both effective, right? Just depending on how big your facility is, the equipment you're maintaining, all those things play a role, right?
I think with some of the more elaborate systems, the advantage is it'll notify you when an inspection is due or something is becoming due or overdue. Yeah. Where I don't know how good spreadsheets can get, but as opposed to maintaining a spreadsheet,
you have to keep on to it yourself a little bit more. If you're not paying attention, then you can. Oh yeah, we were supposed to inspect a bunch of stuff last year.
Yeah, and sort and filter might not work. There are programs out there like PCMS, Visions is another one. There's probably a few other ones that you can use to kind of do that, but even those licenses are pretty expensive from what I hear. So
it just depends, right? Cost comes in there at a certain point too. I mean, for some facilities, it's just better to do a turnaround every 2 years and inspect everything every 2 years. Just depends on what you have and how much, right?
Mm-hmm. And 506 does actually say that, for smaller facilities, do something accordingly, but as long as you follow the regulations in the PESR for having a quality management program. Section 5 also covers management of change. There's a little blurb there about the pressure equipment safety regulation. And then something that we can actually get into a bit more is an integrity assessment program.
Yeah, that's good. Wow, where do we have installations is way down there too. Jeez. The integrity assessment and the installations, it all kind of flows together nicely.
It does. It jumps around a little bit though, but basically it says, some basic responsibilities that the owner must meet. See right there, it says owner must meet are outlined below. Provide sufficient, competent persons and other resources to manage their integrity assessment program. This may require that integrity assessments are outsourced to it says inspection company, but it's crossed out because I have the revised version, but an integrity assessment organization that holds a cap under the PESR. Okay.
Yeah. So that's a great example of those smaller places where you've got your maintenance team and it's, a bunch of tradesmen in that, looking after it. You maybe have an engineer on staff or something, and that's about all you're limited to. So when it comes to the integrity stuff, you farm that out to one of these inspection companies, and that's fine, right? Maybe that works for you, and that's just a way you can do it. But you still have to have a team in place and some sort of IMS plan or something like that in place. You don't just run with nothing.
Yeah, I've worked for integrity assessment organizations where you would just contact the chief inspector, who's also the plant manager, and you would actually notify them, hey, you have these pieces of equipment due, in the next 6 months. When do you want us to come in and perform the inspections? And it's as simple as that. And that's usually how it goes, especially, for some of the larger inspection organizations. I don't know if I want to name the names, but we know basically who they are. They can either notify the client that, hey, you have X number of pieces of equipment coming due, or the client will notify them, hey, we got X number of pieces coming due. We need externals done, or we're having a turnaround. This is how big it is. This is the manpower we need.
Yep.
So, and that's something that's actually under section 5.3 of the integrity assessment program, where it says maintain appropriate planning and communication processes to ensure that the appropriate inspection plans are prepared and executed, and that each item of pressure equipment is inspected, serviced by the due date assigned in accordance with AB-506. And that gets into some of the interval grades, which we'll get into Probably not this episode, the way things are going.
No, I don't think so. Not with those long explanations.
Unless you want a 5-hour episode. Yeah. Jeez.
But yeah, that's basically it. And it's no different than a big facility. You're going to want to know in advance, especially if it's going to result in a turnaround or a small pit stop to get into this equipment and look at it. You got to pull bundles or something like that. You can't do that while it's running, obviously. So, I mean, it'd be something like if you're a contract chief for a small facility, you'd let them know like, hey, in, 2023, we've got 10, 15 vessels due, whatever it is, right? However, whatever you're looking after. Then if they have like a planning team and a maintenance team involved there, they can kind of prepare for that, kind of get their turnaround scheduled in. You can prepare for it if you're providing the inspection people, whatever it is, right? And it's no different than the big places other than there's a lot more people involved and their turnarounds are kind of pre-planned out a lot farther, but it's the same idea. They'd be planning for them. They'd know how many things they're going to inspect, what kind of projects they're going to do, all sorts of things, right? So it's the same idea, just smaller scale.
Yep. Okay. Scott, I feel like we're motoring now. Section 6 of this.
Got some traction.
Yeah. Equipment, records, and location changes. So AB-506 states that the owner must maintain a current inventory of all pressure equipment items that are owned or operated by the company, and also equipment records for each item of pressure equipment. Okay, this sounds pretty self-explanatory, but there are, they're usually, well, even some of the bigger, facilities that we've worked at, like there's just random pieces of equipment that have fallen through the cracks. Like they have the information, but it's not organized in a proper manner.
Well,
But
the bigger places are probably worse just because the volume of it, right? There's so many things that, one or two or 10 or whatever piece of equipment just happen to get slipped through the cracks or something like that. A little small facility, if you got 10 pieces of equipment, it should be able to keep a grip on that.
yeah, well, or they sent the contractors like us out to do all the information and we just never turned it over. That never happened. So I think a good example of this though is typically for the upstream side of things where you have equipment at, well site facilities or wellhead facilities. Mm-hmm. It gets moved a lot if the well runs dry or it becomes not as productive. They can grab those skids and go chuck them at a different well, right? And, it's up to the owner/owner user to notify ABSA like where these things are. And, when you do that, they're, what are the lease numbers called again? Jeez, I can't remember what they're called.
LSDs?
LSDs, yeah. So you'll have to actually name your LSD and like which equipment you have there. And you can state that in your ESR, which is your electronic summary report. So another way, I'm getting ahead of myself.
No, I was going to go into the ESR here if we weren't, so this is good.
Well, one thing I was going to say actually before we get into that is like they also want to know the status of the pressure equipment, whether it's operational or decommissioned or idle, right?
Yep.
And that kind of comes with an AB-10. So an AB-10 is a form which you can fill out and send to ABSA to kind of, it's either decommissioned and or a change of ownership kind of document, right?
Yep.
So if I'm selling a pressure vessel to Scott, I could fill out an AB-10 and say, A number vessel, blah, 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 is now being sold to Scott's ABC Corporation, and he's now the owner of it. Don't charge me that. What was it like a?
I was just going to say
cheap,
it's to your
cheap fee.
It's to your benefit. You get rid of the fees now.
But it says here that an ABSA form AB-10 or an owner's electronic summary report ESR are used to notify ABSA when there's a change in ownership and or location or other status changes. Now, would you do an AB-10 if you owned it and then moved it to a different location, or could you just state that on the ESR?
I think the ESR would be adequate for that one because it's not a change of ownership, or I'm assuming it's not a change of ownership in your fantasy here. But that's really if it's just going to like a different owner that's going to have a different integrity program or not have one at all. That's kind of I think what they're worried about there. So that would be something and back to your point with the AB-10, it goes hand in hand with that ESR. So the AB-10 is kind of like the instant notification. Okay, we decommissioned this thing. Stop charging us for it. You would also update that on your ESR, which you submit quarterly or yearly, depending on what situation you're in.
Yeah, and that's actually, it can be a fairly big job, especially for companies who have a lot of, smaller vessels that they do move around a lot. Like, you need to keep on top of that. And that's something your integrity assessment organization can do for you, and or someone within the organization. But
it is a big job. Yeah. And it's even worse, I would say, for those big facilities that have, like, let's say thousands of pieces of equipment, because unless your integrity program can speak to that ESR and keep it pre-populated, which I don't know too many if they have that capability or not. Maybe they do, but man, that's a big job, because it's just an Excel sheet is all it is, and it's got your equipment, the location, the status of it, and then it has your thorough inspection dates, because that's what they're really interested in, making sure you're doing them. So that's a big job to keep that thing updated. A little easier on a smaller facility when you're under 100 pieces of equipment type of thing. A little easier to keep that on, especially if you're on the routine 2 or 4 year cycle, something like that. A little easier to manage. But yeah, when you're talking about thousands of pieces of equipment, what a big job, because that's at the very most 1 year you're updating that thing. And that's with the thorough inspection dates, any major repairs you've done, if you swapped the equipment, if you decommissioned it, if you sold it, if you're adding new equipment that gets added to your list. So yeah, back to the definition of the ESR, it's essentially, now I'm saying it, just a Excel sheet of all your equipment with the status and a little bit of the inspection history, if you will. Not so much the history, but just the dates of when they're done, when they're coming due, that type of thing.
Yeah, I think that's all it has, like last inspected and then the next interval, just in case they want to check up on you.
Yeah, it's really what it's for. Yeah. And I believe an ISI has to certify that.
Yeah.
That piece of spreadsheet, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, no, I think if you actually keep up to date on it, and it's pretty good, like Scott was saying, like if you do have changes, you can just go to those specific pieces of equipment, but it is a lot of work actually updating it. And I wonder if some of the, no, because the ESR is a document that comes right from ABSA.
Yeah.
It's a spreadsheet, right? Yeah.
Yeah, it's just an Excel sheet. I've done these for a couple smaller facilities in Edmonton, working for a company like as a contract chief type of thing and managing that for them. And it's not bad with a small facility, because it's really easy to kind of keep your thumb on it, because it's small number of pieces of equipment. And like I said, they're probably on a routine 2 or 4 year cycle, something like that. So it's not so bad. It's, those big facilities, like I said, that's going to be a hard thing. I mean, when your turnarounds are coming up, so I guess nothing's changed, but I mean, you have little unplanned outages here and there. That's when you have to get on top of that thing, keep it updated before you submit it at the end of the year. I think it's usually January they want them, or quarterly if you're doing all kinds of things, like say you're doing a big expansion and adding new equipment, they're going to want to know about that. They're not going to want to see 100 new pieces of equipment at the end of the year. Like, what's going on here?
We could have been charging you for all this stuff.
Yeah, so they're going to want a little more notice on that. But if you're pretty routine with your turnaround cycles, yearly is usually adequate for those.
Yeah. Have we beat that one to death?
I think so, yeah.
All right. Section 7 is integrity assessment organizations, previously known as inspection organizations.
Or inspection companies.
Yeah, or inspection companies. Couldn't be. It's got to sound official. Integrity assessment organizations.
Well, inspection company, that's not an acronym. Got to have at least 3 letters.
Well, you get ironically, it's IC, right? Yeah. Anyway, like we were saying before, integrity assessment organizations do need to hold a cap to perform the inspections on behalf of owners and or owner users to make these inspections legitimate. Owner users can have their own cap, which makes them, having a cap makes you an owner user, but that essentially makes you your own integrity assessment organization.
Yep.
And you can employ people to do that as long as they're deemed competent, right? So,
yeah, I would say with that one, specifically for you contract guys that are maybe fresh to the ISI if you're contracted by one of these big facilities, owner user companies, you can go ahead and work under their program. You can certify things, write your A number down. That's fine. If you go contract yourself to a smaller facility that does not have an owner user program, don't certify things with your A number, because you can't actually do that. You'd have to be working for like one of the what do we call them now? Integrity assessment organizations.
Mm-hmm.
You'd have to be working for one of them that was working for that, or that was sub to that facility. That would have to be the setup. If you went there as your own individual, you could do externals, I guess. That would probably be okay. But if you're doing thorough stuff and endorsing it as an ISI, well, you shouldn't be doing that, because you remember, you got to have that cap to go along with it. So if they're not an owner user, not to say they can't employ you and pay you, but your inspections are basically irrelevant, because there's no cap, no owner user program that you're working under. Unless, of course, you have your own.
I think you still need to be deemed competent to perform externals, though. Like even though,
Sure. I'm just talking about a ISI though. Like if you're an ISI inspector and they hire you to come in and you do a bunch of internal inspections and write a report for them, well, they're no good, right? Because you can't certify them without having working under a cap or an owner user program.
Yeah, and actually, I don't know if I do want to say this or not, but like as an individual, you can get your own cap, but you'd just be
sure,
right?
Yeah.
But you just need to have all the programs and systems in place to ensure you got the cap from ABSA, right? Like you'd go under the review just as any of the larger companies would, but technically you could get your own cap and be your own integrity assessment organization as a one-man show.
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing saying you can't be a one-man band. You're just going to be limited to your workload. It would be it, right? And maybe you work for one small facility and that's all you do. You probably get by with that. But it'd be a tough thing to do if you took on a bunch of different sites with just yourself. It'd be a hard thing to juggle.
I think one thing, I do have I do have some stuff highlighted under this section, and it's kind of long, but I think one thing that's kind of funny is competent in this context means that the inspector has the appropriate qualifications, knowledge, skills, experience, and behaviors to perform the assigned inspection activity in accordance with the PESR and AB-506, the applicable recognized and generally accepted good engineering practices, and the employer's requirements. What do you think the behaviors are?
I was going to ask you. I don't know. I don't like that.
I can't wear my Daisy Duke FR coveralls and go do some inspections. Is that what kind of behavior is that?
I don't know. Or maybe you have to.
Depends on the company, I guess. Eh? I thought that was kind of interesting, that behaviors. So essentially, they want you to know what you're doing while you're looking at this stuff, and I guess that, in that context, my behaviors could be deemed questionable.
Good point.
So that's why I have Scott here, just to rein me in. So that's just, you got to have documented processes and be able to properly establish records and maintain records, that if anything was to happen and you were to get audited, you do have everything in place and you do have all the documents you needed to certify the inspection and or the repair, right? Basically it.
Yeah, and if you're hiring these guys, again, ABSA directory, have a look, make sure they have a cap. If they don't know what a cap is, then probably call somebody else.
Or tell them to listen to this podcast.
Give us a call.
Yeah.
We can't help you either.
Okay. Next section is section 8, qualifications of persons performing the inspections. The first sentence underneath that is, a person performing in-service inspections must be competent to carry out the appropriate integrity assessments. A person who inspects and certifies pressure equipment under an owner user and or authorized integrity assessment organization's certificate of authorization permit must hold the appropriate Alberta in-service certificate of competency, which is your ISI.
Right. So if you want to do a thorough inspection and assessment on a piece of pressure equipment in Alberta, you have to have first an owner user program or a cap, and you have to have an ISI. There you have it.
Yeah. It also states that the ISI must be directly involved in the inspection activity and may be assisted by persons who do not hold an in-service inspector certificate of competency, provided these persons have been appropriately trained and qualified in accordance with their employer's registered quality management system.
Oh, I like this one. How many times have you had somebody, maybe not how many times.
I was going to say,
we don't need a number here, but has somebody ever brought a turnover package to you that is like completely signed off for repairs done? It's all buttoned up. They've hydrated it or whatever they've done to it. Manway's closed. Everything's signed off except for the AB-40. Here, we need we need someone with their in service to certify this. Here, sign this. No, that's not how that works. I was not directly involved in this. I have no idea what they did. If I didn't see a repair, I'm not signing for it. Unfortunately, a lot of people will, but Frank just read it right out of the document.
Mm-hmm.
You got to be directly involved in that. Does that mean you have to be like the only guy there and bird dogging the whole thing? No, it doesn't mean that, but you do have to have some direct hands-on involvement. You can use junior people if that's your setup to assist you. That's fine, but you got to be directly involved. You're not the guy. You're not just, when you have your ISI, you're not just sitting at a desk signing AB-40s or certifying inspection reports for people. That's not your role. It's not the intent of that certification.
Well, theoretically, if you had someone who was appropriately trained, you could, and you trusted them, you could sign it off. But what if I came up to you and said, Scott, but I have all the NDE reports here in the hydro test report.
It's all here, though. Just sign it.
But Scott, I'm the repair organization's QC guy. Like I've certified, like I've watched it all. Don't worry.
It's all good. Trust me.
You should be involved as an ISI, especially when you're signing AB-40s or AB-83s, right? That's, I think, what Scott's trying to touch on. Like it's fun. Well, it's not fun, but it's all right to trust the QC of the contractor who's doing it. But it's also part of your due diligence as a air quotes ISI to go in and check on them on certain phases of the repair and or construction and or whatever they're doing. That's what hold points are for on their ITP, right? Or review points or verification points, depending on how they label them.
Well, I mean, and just look at that document too. I mean, you gotta write your name, the company you work for, their cap number, your A number. You got to sign it. You really want to do all that without knowing what is going on?
Well, that's why I always put Scott's Inspection Services. Right.
Just know what you're signing for and know your comfort level. But the intent of that is you're the one involved. You're overseeing it. It got repaired how you want it and to the applicable code and jurisdiction requirements and all that good stuff. But you're not just there to stamp and sign things. That's not what that's for. Well,
you know what? Actually, Scott, I do have a couple things highlighted. Excuse me. I do have a few things highlighted underneath that. Is under that section, there's a few bullet points, and it goes, the ISI is responsible for all inspection and certification activities. Suitable records must be maintained to document the training and experience and competence verification of the inspectors. Inspections must be completed in accordance with the detailed inspection plans and checklists that are approved by the ISI. So they want you to know what you're doing, how you're going to do it, and then execute it. And then actually say, I've done all these steps, just kind of like your ITP kind of thing, where they want you to understand the flow of everything and understand what you just looked at and what you're accepting.
Well, your inspection plan is going to, in some cases, be a lot like an ITP as well. Yep. And we'll get to that pretty shortly here when we start talking about installation inspections, and then we'll kind of roll into it from there. I think that's the next thing coming up. But yeah, it is very similar type of process, maybe even similar looking in some cases.
Sometimes, yeah. And the last bullet point, well, it's not the last one, but the last one I have highlighted is all inspection and examination records must be evaluated and approved by the ISI, right? And that's, that's touching on your ITP, your ITP, your NDE, and even just your thorough assessment report, right? Like that's
Yeah, the big,
that's what it's talking about.
the big takeaway with that is, I guess, when you're going to do an overview look at this, is kind of the inspection plan. Doesn't have to be written by the ISI necessarily, but it has to be certified by them somehow, some way, whether you do that with an electronic program or whatever you got in place. The thorough assessment, which is typically an internal inspection, they have to certify that too. Any repairs they would have to certify as well. So if you're looking to become an ISI and you take on that certification, that's a lot of things you're responsible for now all of a sudden. And you have to be involved and be aware of what's going on there. Again, you're not just there to sign things. Well, you are, but you're supposed to be involved and know what's going on.
Yeah. Next section is section 9, and which is the SIP, Certificate of Inspection Permit. We've already touched on this, and maybe just 3 things to refresh on is that the ABSA SCO, Safety Codes Officer, is going to be notified for any imported equipment for the inspection, the initial inspection of the equipment. The Certificate of Inspection Permit is retained by the owner, and that the terms and conditions of the certificate of inspection are met. And that was what we talked about, either the overpressure protection and or that they have to have a integrity management program to operate the equipment.
Yeah, and then the once we get rolling into that inspection plan, that's I think it's usually within 12 months, I believe. You're supposed to have an inspection plan in place, and if you're not an owner user and don't have anything like that, you'll have to send it to them kind of for a pre-approval type of thing. But it is one of those requirements once it's in operation, the clock's kind of counting down. You got to get some sort of plan in place there. You don't just let it operate until 1 year goes by and you're supposed to inspect it again as a grade 1.
Yeah, well, you can, but
I suppose.
Okay, section 10 is the in-service inspection program. And
right.
I don't want to, this is something that I don't want to whip through it, Scott, but we're already at an hour and 15 minutes.
Jeez. Well, did we do this section and then call it a day? Because we're not getting to grades or anything.
I know this is something we should.
This won't be too bad because there's a couple things I want to talk to here. Let's just do it. We got time.
There's people listening to us squibble about this now. Okay. So you're in-service inspection programs. Okay. The owners must maintain an effective integrity assessment program that covers all equipment in the pressure system. Particular attention must be paid to piping installed on process plants, as most recorded catastrophic events and other pressure equipment failures on process plants were the result of failures or leaks within the piping systems. Now, one thing I like about this statement is that Scott's supplemental API 570 ticket that he doesn't like, this is where I really think it comes into value, right? Scott was right in saying that nobody's getting work just because they have a 570 ticket. You're 100% right on that. But piping is like 90 to 95% of your facility. And that's where most of the failures occur.
Yeah.
Right. So
it's all good stats.
Those are stats that I made up, by the way. So I don't know exactly the ratio of piping to equipment, but it is where most of your leaks and stuff occur. And that's why having an effective RBI program comes into play, and knowing where your mechanisms are occurring and where to look for them. That is a totally different topic and a different conversation, but I just kind of wanted to chuck that in there.
Yeah, we'll get into that a little bit maybe towards the end when we revisit RBI, the end of this series or whatever this is going to be. We won't go too crazy into RBI because that's something you can talk about for a long time, but we could dive into that a little deeper. Is there anything else you want to read off there, or should we just kind of rattle through a couple, I don't know, bit of a, not really a life cycle, just a couple scenarios, I guess, like installation inspection. Do you want to start with that, what that is, what might be involved there? Because that's kind of really when it starts. Like with this document, we're bypassing the fabrication and everything. That's not our concern at this point anymore. So the equipment's dropped in. You're going to do an installation inspection. One of the things I guess a couple points here. Like, so any boilers that you have, ABSA is going to do the installation inspections, and then everything else, assuming you're an owner user or you have one of those inspection companies contracted, they'll do those. So owner user or a cap company with the ISI people and all that good stuff that we keep hammering home. So a couple points I want to make with the installation inspection. I don't want to talk about too much on what that is. Maybe Frank does, but at this stage, you're going to start the equipment file too. And I think that's the most important thing. It's pretty good nowadays because everything's electronic and it's really easy to create these. And, you know, we see a lot of old equipment from the 80s now where a lot of times you're missing data reports or the history is a little vague or whatever's going on. But this is a great time to start that equipment folder because some of the first things you're going to get, like you're going to have the manufacturer's data report. Should have had that before it was installed anyways. You're going to have that certificate of inspection permit that we've talked about a couple times now. You're going to have that in your equipment folder. You're going to be verifying the A number. You're going to be verifying the nameplate matches the MDR and the inspection permit, all that stuff. Make sure that all lines up. Back to the physical inspection of it, you're going to be verifying that there's some sort of overpressure protection, whether that be at PSV or by system design or whatever it is you have in place. This is going to be the time you're verifying that. You might take some baseline readings, and then you'll be looking at like supports and grounding and things like that. But I think the point I really wanted to make here is that this is the time when you get that equipment file started. Oh, you probably already have it started actually when you receive the equipment and you have like an MDR sitting in there. Now you're going to have the inspection permit in there. Going to be verifying all those things. You'll do up some sort of installation inspection report. You'll have that in there. That would be a good opportunity to note things like the A numbers in a weird spot, something like that. That would be a good thing to note. And then from there, you're going to start developing an inspection plan, and that's kind of one of the requirements they lay out for you. Once equipment's installed, you basically have 12 months to get something in place and get it approved if need be. If you have ISIs on staff and you're an owner user or one of those companies we spoke of, you can certify those inspection plans, but there is kind of a timeline for that. So that's once it's installed, your inspection's complete, your equipment file's started. That's kind of the next thing. You'll start building an inspection plan, and start. The grading system's pretty easy at first. Starts at grade 1. We'll probably have to get into that next episode, but that's kind of how that, I guess, is the birth of your equipment, if you will, aside from the fabrication phase.
You know what? One thing I wanted to touch on is you were talking poetically. I was just listening, but like one thing I wanted to touch on for the baseline readings is you should probably, this is my opinion, but take at least 4 baseline readings on every nozzle, right? Because in the future, it's usually the blinded nozzles and the nozzles that are left uninsulated that corrode the most, right? At least you'll have some sort of baseline information on there that you can calculate either a long-term corrosion rate on it, because it's always those nozzles that countless times where I've seen nozzles corrode and like get close to T-min or have to be repaired is nozzles that we have no information on except for the nominals that are just given, right?
Right.
And we have no information on them. Just take that extra time and do that on your baseline stuff. And obviously wherever else you have CMLs CMLs. And that's the biggest stuff, because nominal is good, but you can't actually determine an actual corrosion rate on it, especially on nozzles made out of piping and stuff, because you have that 12.5% variance.
Well, you can, but it's just not as accurate, right? Because you're
exactly.
going with nominal and mil tolerance and things, and there's always some error, but there's a lot more when you're doing it that way, because you don't have that baseline reading. You're just going with nominal, which, it's going to be close to that, but there is a lot more error than if you actually took that reading.
For sure, but on thicker nozzles, that 12.5% can turn out to be like millimeters.
Sure, yeah.
Right? And have you ever come across like stainless piping or a nozzle made out of stainless, which was already at the mil tolerance, and then like you go take a reading or you get a reading from the tech on it and it's like at that or below, and you're like, well, what the hell was it, 15 years ago?
Or the schedule is not what is on the MDR, and you don't realize that until you do some UT readings like somewhere down the road when you're doing an inspection. Like, what the hell's going on? Is uniform corrosion or is it a different schedule?
Yeah, well, the last turnaround, one of the last turnarounds we worked together, that there was freaking nozzles that were way thicker or thinner than what the MDR said. And
it's more common than you think that happens. Yeah.
Right. So take that and, take those this is the time to like get everything correct in your equipment file, so that future you or whoever comes after you kind of has the proper information to, assess this piece of equipment or portion of the equipment properly and make a good call.
Well, wouldn't that save Frank a lot of running around if he looked at the installation inspection and it said on there, nozzles N1 and N2 are extra strong, not 160 like the MDR says, and the A number is stamped on the bottom of the manway flange or something like that. There's a couple things right there that you'd be struggling with maybe a shift or two, but okay, somebody's already figured that out for me.
100%, but as a dirty contract inspector, that is also up to the unit inspectors or the people who've created that inspection task to inform you that. Because how many times have you been inspecting a piece of equipment where you're like, holy crap, like this looks low or something, and like, oh yeah, we found that in like 2002, like don't worry about it.
Well, I mean, that would go to that would go back to your inspection plan, and that information should be put in there, because let's say you're on a claw job, for example, and you don't have access to the equipment folder and you don't know any of the history, you are going to have the inspection plan that they've laid out. So you're going to have that, probably nothing else, but you'll have that. So it'll be, the unit inspector, whoever built that thing, but they should have pulled any of that information. So just back to the point again of the installation inspection or the first inspection or whatever it is, it's good to note that information, and then that can get carried over into the inspection plan. That's the idea, right? So somebody's not wasting time on it every time you go in and look at it.
That's the idea, but what usually happens.
It's a good theory, I guess, but
yeah. We're not working at NASA here. No. So that's pretty much it. What else can we touch on now? Like for the other,
talk about externals and thorough, the difference there, because we do have that written down.
Well, one other thing though, like that should be included in your inspection plan is like credible damage mechanisms.
Yeah, sure.
Right.
We didn't really talk about the inspection plan a lot, just that you needed one. But yeah, like we could rattle off some things that would be in there, or where you would get that information.
Right. So you'd want to know credible damage mechanisms. The locations that these damage mechanisms are, expected. You could have like a vertical, like a vertical drum, I guess. I don't know. That's
interesting.
Yeah. Wow. You could have like a drum, but like a vertical vessel which holds liquid, right? And you'll have, if there's vapor phase at the top, you might have different damage mechanisms than the bottom portion of it, which is going to, at the liquid level or below.
Yeah, or shell and tube side, for example,
right.
Two different processes entirely.
Yeah, shell and tube exchangers, that you're totally different mechanisms, right? And even depending on the temperature differential, like you might have different type of damage mechanism right where the hot feed comes in, or I guess it would be feed, but like the hot product comes in and it might get instantly cooled down by cooling water or something, and you might have something interesting there.
Yeah, different temperature, like you said, different pressure too, right? Like, like those, a lot of them are designed to, the tubes can't handle the external pressure without the internal pressure, right? So without that differential calculated. So that's, somewhat of a critical thing. So even when you're hydro testing them too, that comes into play. But yeah, to your different damage mechanism thing, for sure, the temperature and pressure can be completely different or very close by design, because it has to operate that way.
Yeah, and even stacked exchangers, like twin exchangers there, where the top one or the bottom one, whichever one sees the hotter product, it might be cooling that down, and you might see acid start to precipitate, well, maybe not precipitate out, but acid start to form as that feed gets cooler, or different types of salts and stuff precipitate out and affect your the external surfaces of your tubes, right?
Yeah, it's quite interesting with like, I think anyways, with you have like a 4 or 6 pack of Bank of Exchanges or something like that, and you're pulling all the bundles, how different the level of fouling is on all of them. It's just like almost like a filtration system. Like the one is just plugged solid, and then as you get through it, it's almost clean on the one end, or vice versa, right? It's quite fascinating. So there's obviously some different mechanisms happening there, or potentially, right? Because there's some different process, different temperatures, all kinds of things going on, right?
Yeah, no, chemistry is an amazing thing. Obviously, you might want to look at your pressure relieving devices, any cyclical service requirements, and adjust your corrosion monitoring plans as required. Like even the type of NDE, right? Like you want to have all that kind of stuff listed.
I was going to say that too. If you didn't, the type and extent of NDE, like if you're expecting cracking, you're going to want to do wet fluorescent all over the place. If you're not, are you going to want to do that? That I think too is RBI plays a good hand in that as well too. Being more precise and being more pinpoint with things like that versus just throwing everything at it to see what happens. Wasting resources isn't the best thing either, right? If somebody doesn't have to be in there, why put them in there?
No, and I don't know if there's any good way to say this, but like depending on where the piece of equipment is built, like your first time into it, you might find a lot of manufacturer defects, which may show up as indications and stuff like that.
Sure,
or they
fitness
may be
for service then comes into play too.
Yeah, right off the bat, hey.
Right away.
Yeah. Or they might be actually service related. Like this is stuff that you need to assess. Maybe as an ISI, you may not be able to thoroughly assess everything like that, but that's where corrosion engineers, material engineers come in. Like you need to use these resources to you need to leverage these resources to kind of actually figure out what's happening and adjust the inspection plan accordingly to ensure that safe operation is achieved.
Well, and then it can be quite a bit different too if you're talking like a brand new facility with new equipment where you don't have that history and you're kind of going off of like industry knowledge, published data, things like that, versus a facility that's been in service for several years and you're replacing it, let's say replacing something in kind, then you have a great amount of history of what happened to that thing. And if you didn't change anything like metallurgy or nothing like that, you're going to have a really good idea of what to expect from that next piece of equipment. So that'll adjust your inspection plan significantly too, just on that situation, right?
Yeah, no, definitely. And that's kind of where we start pushing into our grading, right? Right. So, okay. I think I do have a lot more highlighted under this inspection plan stuff, but I think we can move on to external inspections.
Yeah. There's not a lot to say about that. I think the point I wanted to make with the external and the thorough is just the ISI, whether you need it or not. So we talked about needing an ISI for a lot of these things and having to certify a lot of these things. Externals isn't one of them. So you can actually do an external without being an ISI.
So the verbiage in 506 is external inspections are normally conducted by the inspector or ISI. However, other qualified and competent persons who did not hold an ISI certificate of competency may conduct the external inspection when acceptable to the inspector.
Yeah, so if you have your 510 and you're decently experienced and you just haven't went for the ISI yet, you can do external inspections. You don't have to have the ISI do it.
No. But your ISI should probably sign off on that report, right?
Well, they don't have to though. I think that's kind of the takeaway from that. But yeah, you should, especially if you're coming in as a new employee or new contractor or something, somebody should make sure you're competent and know what you're looking at. It's not just something to slough off, even though unfortunately that's sometimes happens. Busted insulation and split caulking. These are important things.
They are important things, especially on piping and stuff, because that's where you get a majority of your CUI. People like to say Alberta is a fairly arid environment, which I can't argue, but given the temperature differential of like, say, an operating piece of pipe and like the snow that lands on it, if you have a lot of busted caulking or whack ass freaking cladding seams, you're going to get water in there and it's going to cause CUI.
Oh yeah, it's dry here, but I mean it rains and stuff.
Well, yeah, it snows more than it rains.
Sure.
One thing other to note is that they do kind of list, maximum intervals of 5 years or a maximum thorough inspection interval for the external, unless otherwise provided for in an owner user's risk-based inspection program. So you can push these external and thorough inspection intervals out a little bit, and we'll get into that in the grading system.
I don't see the externals pushed out a lot myself. I think a lot of people just leave them at 5 years. The thorough stuff, yes, definitely, because, well, I think the big thing with that is you have to have a turnaround to do a thorough, unless it's on stream, which I think we'll get to eventually too. But external is, well, you don't want to have a turnaround for that because you're supposed to do it while it's operating. But I think those are a little easier, just keep on 5 years, and it doesn't require all the resources and the shutting down and all that stuff.
It does, but I think we've both seen companies try and get creative with their RBI program on how they conduct externals.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Especially if it's a new program.
So your thorough inspection is going to be your internal, and it shall be conducted as per AB-506 by the inspector, which is your air quotes ISI.
Yeah,
right?
So that was I think the good point to make with these two. The ISI you have to have an ISI to do a lot of these things, thorough inspection being one of them. Internal was the example Frank used. Externals, you don't. Another example of a thorough could be like your on-stream as well. So you can do your on-stream phased array and things like that are getting quite popular. That can be in some cases substituted or used as your thorough inspection. Now, you want to really do your due diligence and know what you're looking for and know what your mechanisms are. You don't want to do that for the life of the equipment and never go in the thing until it blows out on you. That's not the intent of this either. But there's a time and a place for on-stream versus internal. Just something to throw in there. Thorough doesn't necessarily have to be an internal inspection. You can use on-stream methods to satisfy that.
No, and your thorough inspection should include, equipment maintenance records, operating history, obviously your external inspection records, any on-stream monitoring data, which is your IOWs and stuff like that. Another thing that they have in AB-506 here, which is interesting, is review of process deviations, which falls under your IOWs, incidents and design and process changes, or any other issues that could affect the integrity of the pressure equipment during the assigned thorough inspection interval. So, obviously any process excursions or any changes that may affect it, and that might fall under your management of change. Could something that's changed upstream affect your equipment downstream, and vice versa? So that's something you want to look at.
Yeah, and that should be picked up in your MOC process or maybe MOPC, like procedure change. Sometimes that'll be in there. I think an example of this too is facilities that buy their feedstock from various suppliers and they don't have their own mine necessarily. So you can have different feedstocks coming in at different times of the year or different years, which can, in some cases, really drastically change the mechanism. So if you're doing on-stream inspection, on-stream specifically, that's something to really watch for as well too.
It is. And actually, not to get off on a tangent, but that's where, process engineers come in, and they might have even people in charge of blending different feedstocks to help mitigate certain things. Like maybe a certain feedstock has, a high level of CO2 or something like that. They'll blend that in to kind of, not only get the maximum yield of whatever products that they want, but also to kind of manage, certain impurities and stuff like that they want that could affect the actual equipment integrity.
Yeah, and I think that kind of goes back again to like having the organization structure to manage all this. You don't even necessarily have to have an RBI program, but to do a lot of these things, you're going to have a pretty big organization with all these people in place, process like Frank mentioned, materials engineers, inspectors, mechanical engineers sometimes too. A lot of people play a role in this, and it's just back to the organization structure. I think if it looks like we're wrapping up this section, kind of on a final note too, is the operator rounds. We talked a lot about the inspection history and everything. The operators, they know before anybody if there's a problem, at least a visible problem with it. They know how it's been operating, whether your IOW tells you that or not. They actually know how that equipment's operated. If some process got in there that isn't supposed to, whether you knew about that or not, they know about that. You know, that they're the people to go to. They're the ones to keep a good communication with. There's nothing worse than even the really big facilities I find especially bad for this, where they'll maybe be in contact with like the process engineer or something, but they don't even know who the operators are, and there's no like continual communication with them. They're the best people to be in touch with, especially if there's some sort of process upset type of condition happening, or they're just operating it out of the range or something like that. It's good to know about these things and know those people and talk with them.
Yeah, they're usually the first to find the leaks anyway as well, right? Unless you just happen to be doing externals and find a fresh leak on a valve or something like that. Right?
Yeah. I mean, typically those notifications or whatever it is you're using to get repairs or maintenance or whatever done usually comes from those guys, right?
Yeah. Well, yeah, even like pinhole leaks on piping systems and stuff like that. Like they'll either notice a pressure drop or something, maybe not from a pinhole, but they'll notice a pressure drop like maybe on an upstream side of a valve or something, and they'll go out and walk it down and then, discover liquid coming out of the cladding and be like, okay, let's call inspection. So they are, AB-506 says they're indispensable to an effective integrity assessment program, and they actually are. So,
well, when you think about it, they're a big gang of people. Half of them are monitoring the operation of the equipment. The other half are continually walking around and visually inspecting it to some degree, right?
Yeah, physically operating it. Yeah.
Yeah. So they've got hands and eyes on that stuff at all times. A lot more than anyone else. Inspections for sure, right?
Yep. Scott, have we bored everybody enough for the last hour and a half or so?
Jeez, it's been that long already?
Well, the recorder says an hour and 40 minutes, but I don't know once we cut this down how long it'll actually be. But what do you think?
It doesn't take long to rack up some time.
Oh, man. Anyway, we'll be continuing this conversation with Section 11, interval grades, and hopefully it'll get more exciting. So,
just getting good now.
Hope you guys enjoyed this episode on AB-506, and we'll be continuing that next episode. So let us know what you think. Scott, anything else to the listeners before we sign off here?
No, I don't know. I think that's it. Stay tuned for the next one. And I don't know, if you're going to do some inspections, make sure you have a cap.
See you guys later.